Good evening to everyone, and I think we'll now be starting. A few more people might join, but I thought it might be good to start with the introductions. So first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Beatrice de Carli. I am a reader in urbanism at London Metropolitan University and the Deputy Director of the Research Centre Cube that hosts this event. And the title of our session today is Beyond the Institution. And we have organized this session around the recent publication of the book Beyond the Institution, Transforming the Learning Environment in Architectural Education. So the volume itself that we are going to discuss this evening revolves around, investigates how new and emerging forms of pedagogy, such as distance learning or design build and peer-to-peer practices, are calling into question conventional teaching and learning environments in architecture as well as in other design disciplines. So during the event, we have been joined by the book's co-editors. Sorry, Petra, may I ask you to turn off your microphone because there's a bit of echo. Thank you. So we have been joined by the book's co-editors, Petersson and Christina Linortner, who will outline the aims of the publication and also share highlights from the contributions that have been included there. And then my colleagues and book contributors, Sandra Denicke-Polcher and Jane McAllister, will then explore the case of Crossing Cultures, which is an experiment in education beyond the institution that they initiated and have co-led since 2016. So to give you a bit of background on our speakers, Petra Petersson is an architect and a professor of architecture at the Technical University in Graz, Austria, where she leads the Institute for Construction and Design Principles. And since 2018, she's also the Dean of the Faculty of Architecture in Graz. Christina Linortner is an architect and a lecturer based in Vienna and Graz, and she is currently working on a PhD focusing on architecture and learning in non-institutional contexts. Then from London Met, we have Jane McAllister, is an academic and an architect. She is the course leader of the BA in Architecture at London Metropolitan University. And she practices on live community projects at home and abroad, and is carrying out, alongside her teaching, also carrying out a deputy head for architecture at London Met. And both her scholarship and teaching explore the opportunities and challenges of engaging with live projects as part of a university-based architectural education. So thank you all, especially to our speakers, for sharing their work today, and especially thank you to our speakers from Graz, who are also taking time from a day off and a bank holiday nationally. So I'm really excited and looking forward to the conversation this evening. Also, just a note, as you see, the session is being recorded, and as I was mentioning earlier, we share all of our sessions on the university's website and YouTube channels, and so we will be making this available later on if you want to share it further. So without further ado, I'll leave the floor to Petra and Christina and for the introduction to the volume. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I'm going to try and see if I can share our screen. We've got a little presentation which we prepared. I hope this works. There. Can you see the presentation? Does it work? Yes.
We are seeing your Teams screen right now.
Okay, so it didn't work. I'll try again.
No worries.
I'll try again. This one here. I think that's the better one. There.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's working now.
Okay, I'll just start a bit. I mean, you have already presented us, and I thought we will start to talk a little bit about our the reason for doing this this theme. Our institute is the institute that is in charge of the first year mainly in charge of, we do other teaching as well, but mainly in charge of the first year studies. And so we get about 200 students per year, between 180 to 200 students per year that start here at the Technical University in Graz at the architecture school. And we are doing the main teaching within architectural design and construction design within the first year. And so we have this department, or this institute was newly created when we started, and so we have been spending a lot of years testing out the boundaries of the institution, testing out the boundary between being outside and inside the university, and what happens within the transition of when students start learning here. We have a very mixed group of students of different ages and coming from different backgrounds, and we are trying within this year to kind of explore around that. And what we discovered as well in the beginning is that we used to go on this classical excursion thing with all the students in the spring, and we just found that the group feeling and getting together this whole year was a very positive effect. So we have started doing a beginner's workshop right at the beginning of the studies, the first 3 days, where we we design and build things at the scale 1:1, which is a picture of that. This year we actually even managed together with the students to cook for the 240 people that were there. So they were all part of this process, and then we built this kind of different structures with 200 people together. So this has all been part of our teaching for all these years. And so that's why we felt that when we were going to use a GAM, which is the Graz Architecture magazine, which is a magazine which is published by the architecture faculty and at the Technical University in Graz, and there is an editorial team of which Urs is a part, who is also here with us tonight. And for each year, there are different guest editors, and we were the guest editors for the last issue in the GAM 18. And we thought that the theme of Beyond the Institution was the theme with which we, in a way, have been dealing within our teaching and our research here at our institute for all these years anyway. So it felt like a really natural and a really good opportunity to use this magazine for exploring further and for getting a more general, let's say, view from other people. And so Christina, for instance, she has been, as you said, been researching already within alternative pedagogy and architectural teaching, and she's writing about that in her PhD. So.
So in my doctoral research, I'm focusing on how people who don't study architecture or have not had any recent contact with architecture before, how they actually learn how to build, or how they gain knowledge in the field of building. And for the thesis, I have chosen like 3 very specific places in the United States where at a certain time in the 1970s and 60s, lay people built their own shelters in the context of the counterculture. And from there, I took a part to this GAM issue, where I also wanted to, so I'm in my thesis, I'm looking at the really non-institutional setting of learning architecture. But for this issue, I also wrote an article. It's called Off Campus. And I looked at what it would mean, or what it means to move beyond the institution in architectural teaching. And I looked at a number of different teaching formats, some historical, but also more current ones. And I sort of try to investigate what it means when you leave the university premises behind, and if then also the institutional framework and setting, if that is possible to leave behind, or if this would always sort of be dragged along and stays anyway wherever you go. So that was like the main question of that article. And in that image that you see, it's an image from the 1970s, I think, where it's in California, where there was a landscape designer, Lawrence Halprin, who took design students to the beach, and he sort of well, it was his wife, Anne Halprin, who was a very famous modern dance choreographer, and she like sort of invented environmental dance, and together they also provided this environmental education, dance and movement education for design students. I think it was maybe one of the first times where there was this move into the so-called environment.
What we also looked at in this issue was, of course, the physical space of architecture schools, looking at the institution as a building, and so we, for instance, had a look at the architecture school in Nantes, which was designed to incorporate extra unprogrammed space to be used outside the normal institution. It's also part of supposed to kind of interact with the surrounding urban fabric, and has a sort of part of the cityscape. So it has these, Lacaton Vassal, who designed this building, and we have an interview with them about this idea. They kind of took, in the competition already, they took what was being asked for the actual institution. They made a much more, let's say, a cheaper building than what people were expecting, and thereby produced more area that was actually not, nobody thought that you could actually also manage to have. And by producing this extra area outside the normal rooms that were supposed to be provided within that university, they provided spaces which can now be used in a completely different context. So partly it's been things from the city have sort of moved into the architecture school, but the architecture school also uses these spaces for performances or for workshops, etc. And we also had a sociologist who works at the school who because I mean this was built more than 10 years ago or something like that. It was finished, and he has been he wrote an article a little bit about how the building is actually working now when it's being used. So we thought that was a very interesting aspect within the architectural within architecture school buildings. And then we also, this is the article by Jean-Louis Violeau, who wrote about the activation of the area, or the urban area, also through this architecture school. And we also had an article by Hélène Frichot. She's a researcher, a professor. She used to be a professor in Stockholm. She's now in Melbourne, and she was the professor for architectural theory at the KTH, and her main research area is feminist architecture, feminism in architecture. And in this article, she's comparing two buildings in Stockholm, two architecture schools, the one that was built in the 70s and the one that was built not so long ago, that was opened not so long ago, after the 70s building had a fire, and then they decided not to rebuild it, but to actually build a new building. And what she puts forward is of course the way that the political situation and the societal situation around that is at the time when this building is being created has an influence on the building, and indirectly also an influence on how the teaching is actually happening within the building. So the one from the sort of brutalist concrete building from the 70s is very much based on a sort of cooperative working with the students, all the ideas around the sort of socialist Swedish society that was in those days, whereas the building that was opened now is much more closer, obviously, to the current neoliberal setting of Swedish culture and Swedish politics. So, with looking back at these teaching ideas from the 70s, we tried to pick up some ideas that were developed at that time, and maybe you can tell about that. Yeah.
Okay. So in that time period, going outside the institution was a means of finding new ways of teaching architecture in a lot of places, I would say globally almost. Those new ways, they try to distance themselves from the former formalistic education. So we invited some researchers who had done work on the Shadrach Woods, Cedric Price, Colin Ward, and Giancarlo De Carlo, and they had a conversation about those people and what they had in common, and what ways they rethought teaching methods and formats, mostly outside of schools, of the architecture schools, which took a really variety of ways and still has, I think, some impact on teaching now.
We around the same time there was in Zurich the ETH set up a temporary outpost on a boat. This was while they were kind of, I think, renovating the old building and about to move into the new university, and this boat was also a police station, a supermarket, a studio, and became a sort of center for discussion and protest. And Lucia Pennati, who wrote this article, has kind of pointed out the different things that were created at that time. And the interesting thing is that things that were discussed and happened in this building at that time were very important for the further development of the ETH School of Architecture, and led to a big variety of changes, including structural rethinking. So in a way, the intermediate stage in the time spent in the middle of the city was very important for the development of the faculty. And this again was for us an example, a really interesting example of how by leaving, I mean, these are all also again about the physical space, by leaving the space in which you are and transporting yourself into another space, you can start rethinking on a different level. It kind of comes with it. It's not a sort of it shows that also the impact the space of the institution has on our teaching methods, the way that our buildings are done, but by kind of moving outside it. And so there are a couple of other articles in here, amongst others, the one that from your university, which you wrote about your project in Italy, which discussed the current ideas about moving outside the institution and trying something out in a different situation, or with this similar also ideas of kind of building something together with the students, etc. There was also an article that